Uh-oh, I think our poor folks online may have not been able to hear all of that, but they're here in time for the most important parts. We're going to have our guests each share a little bit about their agency or organization and opportunities and efforts to improve. So with that, I think we're starting with, we're starting with, we have Robert Kramer, who many of you may know from his many years at the at SMART. He was the deputy general manager and really the person who got everything really done at SMART. And now he's running things at the People Mover. So Robert, tell us what is going on.
As I was mentioning to my fellow panelists, is lack of whole new category of funds that are created to elevated rail, kind of a
Trying to hide.
thing. So yeah, it's got lots of layers. Okay, so for his parent company, it was actually what I work for, is the Detroit Transportation Group. It's a pretty cool name, I would say. Feels like it has a lot of possibility also, yeah. So we're the owner and operator of the Detroit Mover and also the corporate home of the Detroit Transit. It's kind of two different pieces that fit into the larger transit puzzle. So the People Mover is an elevated system. It's about 3 miles long and around with one track. We've got 13 stations and in this facility. They're over by Rosa Parks actually. It was originally designed as part of a nationwide people mover demonstration thing that looked at a lot of different projects, but ended up basically with just two or three, and it's confused, but very similar to Jacksonville and Miami. So basically, Miami is the closest one. We also have sister rail system, so to speak, in Vancouver and Toronto, that basically the same technology, same type of vehicles. But overall, a very unique system. Originally designed to kind of circulate in a much larger retail mass transit in the downtown area, but we were kind of the only piece that was built for a while. But still has found a niche, I would say, transporting people who live, work, and play and visit downtown. Linking to conventions, hotels. There's a lot of possibility there. That's part of why I was excited to go to the People Mover, is that it's there, right? Someone's done the hard work. A lot of people actually building the guideway up in the subsystems that supply. And now it's a matter of making the most out of what's there to benefit the city residents. Transit police.
Oh, sorry.
That's okay. So the transit police is originally started as field operations. It's the Department of the People Mover, specifically to provide security on the guideway of the trains, and it's evolved over time to also provide some really important services to our partners at DDOT and also to the QLINE since it opened in 2017. What's going on? So we're up to 7 days a week. We've been open for a little over a year now. As of fireworks Monday, Times Square station will be open, so all the stations will be back open again. That's a very important transit connection. Pretty irritating that was the one station we didn't have open because a lot of people take connections to Rosa Parks, senior living facilities in that area that really would benefit having that connectivity. So we're very excited about that. We've got 3 trains regularly now, so a train is 2 cars. And that gives us about 5-minute frequency. Later days, when we've got preventive the skew might be 2 trains. Our goal is to have 4 trains running regularly by January. So it's like, well, how can you get 3? It takes so long. There's some longer term work we need to do to get the equipment ready to have 4 trains reliably on the track. But that is our goal, and we can need it. And then focusing really on having clean, bright, and welcoming station conditions. So right now, that just means cleaning them and making sure that the lights are on and the doors work and all that sort of thing. But I'll talk about it in a second. Some technology upgrades that will make them even more nice. So our ridership right now is about 40% and growing of our pre-pandemic. Remember that right before the pandemic is also when Julia was rehab. located. It's 41 nights a year of the tenants. But some really interesting things have since then. Looking at some of the trends during the pandemic, the riverfront towers that are physically connected to that station have been really steady ridership generators. And as the conventions and the visitors and even a number of the venues and offices come back online, seen a lot of regular riding of the people going on. Extending the regular hours to the next Sunday, we think really is starting to have a big effect that's not but really we have a lot more work to do as far as wayfinding and connections and marketing to have people learn how they can benefit from people. I like to joke that the stations are large, right? Some of them are 4 or 5 stories tall, height-wise, glass and concrete. But they're like this really cool, like thing, like, hey, come let me show you through these doors, and they're really cool. Like it's not even apparent really from the street level that what the system does. And I think the technology improvements that we're working on really will help make it the stations much more inviting and visible, but also make it easier to understand from the street level how to use the system to create. So we TV information monitors, PA systems, lighting, really change the experience. That's our focus, is to improve rider experience.
It stopped showing up there, and now, okay.
Okay.
So we're done with this one?
Yeah.
All right.
Okay, so looking ahead, so the big projects, trying to fit my right amount of time, but the technology upgrades I talked about are big. So basically, all the cameras, the key systems, the information devices are all going to be replaced and upgraded. Gives a lot more tools to our control center to help people navigate the system, but also will make it, like I was saying, much easier for people to understand how they interface with downtime. So you do like an interactive kiosk at the street level on the platform. There'll be signs that show when the next trains are arriving, the key things that are in that area. It's a lot of the things that, if you know the system, maybe you're like, oh yeah, of course I know how to get here or there. But riding the system more and more, people, especially if they're single time visitors, like, where do I get off the fourth wheel? That should be something that you don't have to, like, it should be giant football stickers or something to help people understand that that kind of generator is really just a couple blocks away. Because it's not a big line of sight, we've got a little work to do to help people understand that. We're doing a rail curb replacement project, which is something that's really unexciting, generally speaking. And will cause some disruption in the system. It's going to be over 2 phases. So one phase will be this fall, which we keep our goal is to keep half the system open. And then next year, for the second phase, we will shut the system down for a number of weeks to replace these curb segments that have not been replaced. After that, they'll be good for another 35 years, basically. So that's a good thing. And then just some initiatives. So we as you put in the RTA mentioned their last meeting, that we're coordinating with Michigan Fire to make the Grand Circus Park Station and officials, the official station for the D2A2 bus. So there will be, if you've been on that service and you've gone inside the Blake Transit Center, they have some TV screens that are tracking the location of the bus, talking about the service and the schedule. We'll have screens just like that inside Grand Circus Park. Then we're going to be moving the stop to be on the curb right outside the door to that station too. So you'll be able to sit inside the station, wait for the train or wait for the bus to arrive. Obviously, also have convenient access to the train too. So that's not like moving mountains, right? We're basically just doing a bus stop 2 blocks and adding some TV screens. But if it makes the experience that much better,
Yeah. Anyone who's wandered around Grand Circus Park trying to find that stop, I will appreciate it.
yeah, and that's also our greatest stop in other ways because it's very closely connected to QLINE as well. So there's just a lot of opportunity for synergy there that kind of makes that into a natural hub, which makes sense. It's kind of the middle of a small school, at least. And then last couple of things, we'd like to do some more study exploration of downtown building enhancements. So coordinating more closely with the QLINE, looking at other, there's a way to put vehicles or other mobility stuff like that's estimated. And also maybe in the longer term, there are that could expand. That would make sense. Something that useful. Around a little bit and see if there's opportunities. But those would really need to have a strong public-private partnership and right? It would just be like, I should double it and see if people ride it. It'd be more about finding either a development or some destinations that are interested in linking into the system and kind of looking more into that. And then really preparing to support the 2024 big events downtown, greater downtown area, which is the draft, the regional game. Out of the Final Four in 27, there's regional games are already March 24th. So really, I know there's a lot of people pushing in the same direction in the city. QLINE, all of the public-private partnerships are really trying to get everything ready for a really successful couple of months there, and look for it to be right in the middle of that. So these are just larger goals about, we want to make sure that we can be an essential part of the city, helping out people getting around, being safe while they use transit, really try to find more of those partnership opportunities and position that people to be around for another 35 years.
Awesome.
Now, turn it over to you.
All right.
You know, our station is very nice to go on the state. You want this way?
You got it.
Yeah, gotta
QLINE stickers.
make those connections.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah.
Okay, well, I don't listen to us here. QLINE. You may have heard over the last couple of years, we made some big changes. Coming out of the pandemic, we decided to terminate our operations contract with a company called Transdev. We used to run the system for
No, you're good.
no, we're not in this room. I know.
You know, we don't want to, they're having a little hard time on the
Sure. Great, and I will, yeah, I'll just attack it. So we decided to take over operations, bring it all in-house, and so now we're completely locally owned and operated. And we've been producing some really exciting results that I'm looking forward to sharing with you. Okay, there we go. So as I mentioned, we're a nonprofit. For those of you who are not familiar with the QLINE, we are 3.3 miles one direction, so 6.6 miles of rail total along the Woodward corridor. Our northernmost station is Boulevard and Woodward, and then our southernmost is at Congress. We have 6 streetcars. We aim to run a 4-car service through most of the day. That's 15-minute sideways, and then when we have special events, we'll put a 5th car, maybe the 6th car out when demand warrants that. Thank you. Are you open?
She was showing her.
Okay.
Yeah. There you go.
And so you can see the hours, we've been able to expand our hours. We restarted in September of 21. Kind of coming out of the pandemic, we had some more limited hours. We're now open 6 days a week, 8 a.m. to midnight, and then on Sundays we close at 9 p.m. Just to give our team a few more hours to do preventive maintenance on our vehicles, which really helps. And you may recall, if you've been around this rate for any period of time, but this project was really meant to be both a transit option as well as economic development. And so since the QLINE project was announced, probably about 10 years ago, there have been over $10 billion in investment that's taken place along the Woodward corridor. And now we don't claim that as like it's all exclusively because of the QLINE, but when developers are looking at putting residential along the corridor, when stores are looking to locate, or businesses are looking to open, knowing that they have a fixed transit option there is something that gives them a degree of certainty and it's a plus. And in some cases, Francis, I'm excited to hear what you have to talk about later. We've even been cited as a reason why developers need to provide fewer parking spaces for the places that they're building. So really transit can be a powerful economic development tool. And then when we restarted in September 21, we decided to not charge fares. We have remained fare free since then. And that's our hope is to remain free. So that makes it as easy and convenient for people to get around as possible. Okay. There we go.
Okay, I'll just do it, yeah. No problem.
So, what are we doing? We made a lot of changes. Couple of investments I'll talk about before I talk about the stats here is we installed the first stretch of dedicated transit lane in the city in front of Little Caesars Arena. more expensive to do. 2/3 of the days out of the year, we would have humans go out and set up cones along that line. Before each event, 2 hours after the big fun tear it down, we were spending literally tens of thousands of dollars to do that. So we said, let's spend that money in a better way by putting this infrastructure in permanently. So we've done that, and it's severely decreased the number of blockages that we have there. And it's not just for us. Buses can go through as well. I don't know about pedal clubs, they feel a little bit.
I hope not. That would be bad.
We make that available for buses, and one of our biggest, we'll say, skeptics about dedicated transit lane were some of our friends in the law enforcement community. I view this as a sign of success, and they now ask us to put in some additional temporary transit lanes on northbound Woodward, and so we're looking for resources to extend that. So that there are fewer options for people to block the streetcar and keep transit moving quickly, especially during high volume periods. We've also installed transit signal prioritization at 26 of the 31 intersections that we operate through. And so it's not sexy because you can't see it, but let me tell you can feel the difference when you're riding along. It will extend a scale green. If the green is going to change in the next like 5 to 7 seconds, it will hold it over until the streetcar moves through. And if it's a red that they don't have traffic at the other side of the intersection, it will switch it over to green. And then places where we have to switch lanes, they're actually called switches. It will call for the signal for us to move forward more quickly. So if you ever sat on a streetcar and wondered why traffic moving all around me and we're just sitting here, we're not even out of light, it's because we need to change lanes and everywhere else is to stop for us to safely do so. And so we set it up so we'll call for that before we can reach that spot. So many times we'll pull right up, it'll change, and we can pull right through up the center. So we're really excited about using technology in some creative ways to improve service. And so we're doing just that. We have been meeting our headway goals about 72% of the time at the start of the first 4 or 5 months of this year. That's up from the mid to upper 60s in 2022. It's hard to mean stats for the transit operating system. They look all over the place. Trust me when I say it's an improvement. We also communicate that information in real time at all of our stations and through the transit app. So we eliminated a lot of the bias that was providing wildly inaccurate arrival times. And so the information we see at the stations is the information we see at our dispatch center. So it's all one and the same now. And we also got the ability to self-tow vehicles up the end from the legislature. And so we've got a tow truck donated to us. So anytime we've got major events going on, we'll run the tow trucks for preemptively with the lights on so people know, hey, you know, don't park here. And then if somebody happens to park in a car or we get a broken down vehicle, we're able to work with that person. We can move their car around the corner with them, they can call AAA, get it dealt with, and we can move along. And so we've reduced the number of blockages we experience there from about 1 a day to about 1 every 5 days. So hasn't gone away totally, but it's definitely improved significantly. And that's all resulting in higher rides, which I'm really excited to share with you guys. You know, we are seeing about 2,500 daily rides average from the beginning of this year to now, and then the last couple of months. Obviously, as the weather gets warmer and we have more events and activities, we're now averaging about 20,000 rides. I'm sorry, 20,000 rides monthly. I'm sorry, a week. Daily should be week. The second bullet point. QLINE has averaged 20,000 rides a week since April, and that's more than our peak season last year. So ridership is increasing. And one of my favorite stats, you can see what ridership looked like for these 3 major event weekends we had. Friday and Saturday, the Swift. We moved 11,000 students and tiger fans over the course of 40 hours. And it was so fun because you know, everyone dressed up on the cars, people were going downtown to enjoy their time in the city, whether they're running to concert, whether they're going to the game, whether they're just being in the city to enjoy it. And so I'm really happy to be there and serve those needs as well. And we did in the last couple of weeks here, is actually the last week in May before movements. We did a rider intercept survey because we're really curious to understand who is using the QLINE now, because we know that ridership has changed a little bit. While the numbers are growing, we don't necessarily have the daytime ridership that we have pre-pandemic. Everyone was working out of an office, and now we know we have much more work from home going on, and so we wanted to better understand who's riding the QLINE today. And so here's some stats about that. So this was, we had humans on the car interview other humans for riding, so it wasn't, you know, a survey online. And there were about a sample of 300 people that we spoke to in the course of a week, and we made sure to do all of our times a day. We did one special event night, it was the night of the Janet Jackson concert, so I think that was a decent size, but now it's too overwhelming to skew. And this is what we found. So 74% of riders are riders of color, which I think is something that people don't often think of when you think about who's coming downtown and spending time downtown. 68% of the riders we surveyed from that were Detroiters, which is really positive for us because we want to make sure we're moving people in our community around. And 49% of riders live in relatively low income households. And 72% live in households that are making less than $50,000 a year. So, you know, we like to think that the fact that we're making, you know, ridership free, we're not charging fares, is encouraging people who need to be able to get around and get up that corridor. I can't tell you the number of times we've seen folks who are getting ready to go to Comerica Park and work a shift, who hop on the QLINE because nobody wants to pay $30, $40. And who could afford to pay $30, $40 to park in the stadium, right? So we're able to get people around. And then just a couple more facts about our next slide. 48% of those trips, the members our riders we surveyed were work related. So that is a bit lower than what we saw in 2019, the last time this survey was conducted. 60% are riding at least 3 days a week, so we've got some regular ridership there, which feels really exciting. Again, to building on some momentum. 54% use other transit modes, right? You know, it's not just about the streetcar, it's not just about the bus, it's not just about the QLINE, it's not just about the car, bikes or scooters, we need it all to work together. And then 25% for those who are using Bogo and e-scooters to also get around, which we found really interesting. So last couple of things before I turn it over to Francis. You know, I talked about some of the improvements that we made in service. We invested almost $1 million in those investments in signal prioritization and in the dedicated lane. It's actually quite an expensive intervention to do, and so we're looking for additional resources to be able to do more of that. I talked about signal priority a bit. Here's some of the stats on the transit only lanes. We've reduced blockages by 23%. That really is taking into account the ones that result in canceled trips. The number of times where we've been able to prevent people from going in that lane to begin with, it isn't reflected in that number. So the impact for us is even greater and reduce our run times by about 2% in blockages. And so those are real minutes that add up. And so as a result of all these things that we're doing, we're now averaging about 23 minutes to ride from the boulevard all the way down to Congress to get down. And so that's something we feel really great about. And then last couple of things here, you may have heard we're doing a parking lot acquisition at Wayne State University. Lot 12 at the corner of Harper and Woodward. You're able to pay $5 to park there, hop on the QLINE, ride the free or Amsterdam station. You know, we certainly appreciate Wayne State offering that, but you know, truth be told, you could park your car anywhere and ride the QLINE for free. Wayne State was a really partner. We wanted to, some people feel more comfortable about having their car in a lot where they know. Want to make sure to offer that option. We're seeing some real success after that. Definitely on these bigger weekends, like Taylor Swift, like the Grand Prix, people who do ahead of time, it's going to be hard to navigate downtown. So we're doing our best to communicate to people that park your car, transit, get in for free. And I think we should be doing a better message about just buying transit period, not just eco transit. So I think there are opportunities to do that with some of our fellow partners here. You know, we have opportunities to connect to existing rail with the Amtrak line. Coming in obviously with the people who are, you know, I think that there's some quick and easy ways that we can make sure that the people who are riding our services know about each other and use each other's services, and then connecting to future transit options. I know there's a lot of stuff to Detroit, do that with reimagined about bus rapid transit in the city, and so thinking about how the QLINE can play a role in that. You know, the QLINE is always supposed to be the first piece in a much bigger vision for streetcar service to look like in Detroit. So maybe someday we'll see additional streetcar service. Stay tuned for that. And on that last note is we ask people, would you want to see streetcar service? And people say yes. I mean, I think we all want more transit. We want more and better transit to serve a wide range of needs that we have here in the city. And so, you know, that's something that we take really seriously. And at the table with OMB partners with our other to figure out how to improve that situation. So if there's some questions, maybe I'll turn over to Francis.
Let's see if we can switch.
I also have a slide today. I'll say Megan did an amazing job of getting my.
I wasn't sure which one to use. It is based off of like. I'll get
Yeah.
Make
I
sure.
will say, you said signal prioritization is not sexy because it's not something you can see.
I would say loves
But
it.
it is, it's something you can feel.
Yeah.
And I think it's great. It's a great year. So I'm talking about parking, which also is, well, I think it's sexy. It's not sexy to most people, maybe. And I will say too, it's great. You know, I applaud True for putting mobility and parking on the same docket. I think these things are connected. You know, before I was a parking reform advocate, I was like, you know, preservationist. And before I was a parking reform advocate, I was a transit advocate. And before I was a parking reform advocate, I was an environmental, you know, these things are all connected, affordable housing. And we really need to become, I think, aware of, and to some degree, I think that's happening, but I'm all for these kinds of moments where we can talk about these issues, because it feels so often like we're on our own, you know, with the fight. And I think a lot of times there's a lot of continuity in these issues, and hopefully we can build some momentum. So yeah, I'm talking about parking with an exclamation mark. I've done versions of this deck before. I was asked about Detroiters for Parking Reform. We actually started, and we have had meetings in this very place, and I feel Drew's had a lot of connections here. We started because of a stupid decision just a few blocks that way on Fort. I don't know if you remember the Detroit Saturday Night building. Yeah, and this was the latest in what we thought was, you know, a change that was happening, especially downtown, where we had rediscovered it to some degree and invested in it over the last, you know, 10, 20 years now. And so decisions to demolish buildings like this, we had hoped were over, but not. And for 12 parking spaces, when you lose something that's on, you know, national register, or it's adjacent to national register, and because of its historic character, had a chance to be saved, was the impetus for Detroiters for Parking Reform. And you might have seen a version of this slide before, shows you how much of downtown Detroit's area is devoted to parking in some form or other. Red is garages, gray is surface parking, about 50,000 in garages. You know, it's like over 61,000 spaces, approximately 40% of the land. It depends how you measure it. Here's a comparison to Pittsburgh. It's often used as a sort of comparable city. So it's also a fairly small, compact downtown, where you can see, you know, there are a number of garages in blue and red, and also some surface parking, but really a very different scenario in terms of the built environment. And actually, this is a slide from a slide around tax reform, and that is something that we're talking about now. In Pennsylvania, they tax surface lots to a very high degree. It was as high as almost 40% in the past, which really discouraged stupid demolitions and encouraged reuse of old buildings, especially downtown. This is the guy who a lot of people, the high cost of free parking, if anybody's heard of that. He said, oh, and I never noticed this. Aside from the fact that he doesn't use an apostrophe in his statement, it's unfair to have cities where parking is free for cars and housing is expensive for people. I agree with that, except for the apostrophe. I don't think he wrote a book, a tome that I was joking with Lisa. I read on a, I didn't write it. Read it on a cruise because I felt like I was locked in a place and I had to read something that had been on my reading list forever. It's definitely a slog, but it's actually quite accessible and quite readable. And there's 3 basic ideas. I get to them. It all distills down into these 3 things. 1, remove off-street parking requirements. And I'll get into this in a second. Most places require any new development to come with parking. If you decouple that requirement, things can begin to happen. Oh, no. Did I do that?
I don't know. This thing is the person I can eat my day.
If you decouple parking requirements from the developer's right to build, they suddenly have more money for things like affordable housing. It costs upwards of $30,000 to $40,000 per parking space to build a garage, a single parking space in a garage. That's one idea. The second idea is institute dynamic performance pricing. That's a fancy way, and we actually have technology now where we've been doing it in the past. I don't know so much right now, but it's basically where you charge different amounts for curbside parking depending on the time of day and the use. The basic idea is that we need to get across to people that parking is not a free endeavor. This guy Enrique Peñalosa from South America said very eloquently, there's nothing in the Constitution that says you have a right to a free parking space. And it's true. But as Americans, I feel like we've sort of come to that place in our heads. The last thing he recommends is to have parking revenue from the cities go to neighborhood districts where, like on Verner or Livernois, where they are, to encourage those places to improve the quality of life and take the revenue out of the central coffers of the city and bring it back to neighborhoods where they can do more with that money. This is a picture, a graph showing how parking requirements are related to building size. So you can see how much of the land area for a restaurant compared to how much you might build for 1,000 square foot restaurant, how much square footage you need for parking. Here's this thing is in all our ordinances across the country, and this is just a sort of smattering of what is required, and it's sort of to show how ridiculous some of it is. 2 spaces for a barber, 3 spaces per beautician. I'm not sure which ordinance this is. 3 spaces for clergymen, 1 space per 10 nuns. Sex novelty shop, 3 spaces per 1,000 square feet. Swimming pool, 1 space per 2,500 gallons. It's kind of ridiculous. It's a pseudoscience, but it's what we base our zoning codes on, and it's how we're allowed to be able to build new construction. It's also, as I mentioned, super costly. 1 structured parking space costs more than the entire retirement savings of most families, and this is what's added on to development costs. That's, you want to build a restaurant, you want to build a housing development, you have to think about parking every single time. Here are some costs related to building parking at different levels. And this is from the shoot book, which is kind of out of date now. He's updated it a couple of times, but these have only gone up. His other big idea, which I am very guilty of, and I want an honest answer from all of you. Do you cruise to look for parking? Yes.
Yes.
It is a huge waste of
Big time.
And fuel.
and traffic. And like I said, I'm guilty of it too. This goes to the dynamic pricing idea. If you can create a scenario where you're constantly turning over spaces because the market price of those spaces encourages people to think about whether they're driving or not and encourages turnover, then there cuts down on a huge percentage of that cruise time because there's always going to be space available. And that's where the city's mechanism for enforcement and management comes in. We don't do such a great job of a lot of other places who have the ability, the resources to think about it like this, actually can provide parking in a relatively regular kind of way through performance pricing. We all have seen this picture before. I don't even really need to dwell on that. This is an ideal version of a street mix in terms of taking parking out of the mix and having lots more mobility options. Obviously, the colors allude to a greener sense of the future. Here's some local options. I mentioned Livernois. I think that's really coming into its own over the last couple of years. I hope it only gets better. And I think that we can use that example in some of the other commercial corridors around the city. This next set of images, especially around downtown, is something I did for University of Detroit School of Architecture, where I talk about the hunger of parking. I was like a ravenous creature, especially downtown, and it creates these landscapes. This is downtown Detroit. Does anybody recognize this? Like, this is just west of the Fox, and it looks like an unruly mess of parking lots. This is a famous image. You've probably seen this before. It shows the loss of our fabric, of our built environment over time. From the first one is kind of blurry, 1916 on the left, and then it goes into the mid-90s on the right. All the black are where we had, buildings where we had, stuff that we used as human beings, and then it goes to the, the white where it's pulled away, and most of that, as you saw from the earlier picture, is parking. So we lose high quality structures, we lose urban streetscapes, and we cleared entire districts for surface lots. And the last section of these is from this thing I did for the School of Architecture. Just gives you some sad imagery, but I like to think of them as being possibilities again. The Empire Building is right off of Washington, right on Washington Boulevard, right there. What could we build there? The Hotel St. Clair is the entryway to Greektown. It had a very storied history of being a place where you went if you were the city council and the mayor, and you had a bar at the ground floor, and you did deals, sometimes dirty deals, but a lot of times people don't really enjoy being there. It's gone, but what could go there? The Detroit Times building, we used to have 3 big dailies, and that place called Times Square, where there's the People Mover, used to be a newspaper building. The real estate exchange, this is this Monroe block that we've been talking about for a number of years, used to have a skyscraper on it. The next level is this streetscape, this sort of finer grain of urban character, where you don't even know that something's gone necessarily. So this was a little triangular building, just 1 block from the Empire Building, right by the synagogue. Oops, that was, oops, sorry, I'm going in. Oh, wait, no, I'm going the wrong way. I'm getting ahead of myself. It's so tragic. The that's right in front of Comerica Park, right across from the Fox. That's where you park usually if you're doing jury duty on Gratiot, right next to sort of where the one end of Black Bottom, Paradise Valley used to be. Let's see. That's the old Cass Theater. These places are hiding in plain sight. And then finally, sort of the loss of urban fabric over time. You can see where Comerica Park and Ford Field. And then this is the huge warehouse district south of Jefferson along the waterfront, how that has really changed over time. The Lower West Side, I called it. I don't really have a better, this is not far from us actually. And you can see how that has been eroded away. And then this is another view from where we were looking, where that single building, the old film exchange used to be. And can you see it in the top picture?
Fairly.
Can everybody see where it was?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's crazy, but all is not lost. And there's one of the great things about parking reform is that it's like one of the easiest things to do. It's just saying like, we're not going to enforce this parking minimums requirement anymore. And it's actually part of the Zone Detroit process right now, which has been slowly making its way through the city council. So that's another thing we've done as Detroit parking reform is done these advocacy days, or we've done a parking lot walk, which we'll do again in the summer later on. I'd love to have you all come. We ended up here last time where we write postcards, much like Joel has us do, and push for parking reform. So that's my little spiel on downtown parking reform and citywide. I'll just say too, there's another book I forgot to highlight, which I just picked up, which is like a more approachable version. It's kind of an update of kind of current and anecdotes about how parking impacts our life and just getting into it. It's really good by Henry Graybar. And yeah, if you want any parking reading, those are the two books I would recommend.
All right, so much.
One more part.
Yes, in case you needed I like that. There's the very important difference. How much parking do we really need? All right, so those were some excellent presentations. There's obviously a ton of stuff going on in the general mobility space. And I want to shift over to some questions. I would love to hear what sort of questions we have here. I'll see if I can connect with our folks on Zoom. I apologize that I haven't been, yeah. But I wanted to start with one, and maybe it's just sort of extension of what you were saying, Francis, at the end there. What are your recommendations? What's the fix? What obviously that could be a whole nother 20-minute lecture, but in whatever 3 minutes or less, what's changes do we need to make so that parking isn't taking over everything?
It's a great question. I think we tried to distill some of that into a position paper, which is on our website, or Detroit parking. And one of them was removal of parking minutes, which is actively part, as I said, of what the city's considering doing. It would make development, it would change how new development happens in a way where parking then suddenly isn't part of what has to be considered every single time. So that would be a significant change. It would add to a growing list of places around the country that are doing this. You know, Detroit would join the ranks of other cities. I think we're at like 20 or 30 now in the last couple of years. There's other things in terms of downtown that are very specific. I would personally, I mean, it's in the recommendation, say that there should be a moratorium on new surface parking in downtown. You know, other places have done that too, and you know, we have never in the history of the city of Detroit had as much parking as we do now. We have less than half the number of people living in the city than we did at one point, and yet we always still complain about parking. It's like death and taxes and parking. It's like one of those. So it has to go with some of these other things. We have to, at the same time, push our mobility options and get people to understand that you don't need to spend 5 blocks, you know, from the front of the Fox Theater to, you know, your restaurant or the Comerica Park. So these are just a couple of ideas. If you're interested, check out the website. But I would say if we could push for those 2 reforms right off the top and then start having a conversation about it, I think that would be good.
Excellent. And Robert, yeah, a question on how was the people mover ridership during the Grand Prix? How did the Grand Prix impact your service overall?
It was pretty busy at times. Very steady. I think a lot of the, as I was talking about earlier, a lot of the challenges, helping people understand that we're open again.
Yeah.
And where we can connect to, and how we can connect to the QLINE. I think, my personal opinion is this was like a good kind of a soft launch of the Grand Prix.
Yeah.
And it was actually not too hectic. It was, you know, I would encourage if anyone who likes that sort of thing, or just likes seeing that time busy, like next year, it was not stifling or uncomfortable. It was really nice to see people being active and, running, maybe even had a ride, just kind of getting people to and from the area. But everything went really smoothly, and same thing with Taylor Swift, brought a lot of people into the downtown area. Talked to parents who stayed in hotel rooms for multiple nights and basically walked over and waited for their kids to get out. It's just different. That's not something we would have thought about before the pandemic. It's just a different kind of activity. That I think the good transit and less parking.
Absolutely. All right, I think, let's see, Patty, had a question?
Yeah, Lisa, thank you for all the data creating to my donating food. Is there any discussion about maybe getting rid of the stock for food? There's a few of them that are a little bit close, and I realize I'm walking at people that pay money for enterprises, but any thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's, I think it's part of a broader discussion about what kind of service do we have today and what kind of service could we potentially be. Like, I think that makes even more sense if you're gonna expand service. Because like, right now, our policy is we don't stop. If no one calls for a stop and no one's there, we're not stopping at the station. So you need to press the button to request a stop if you're on the streetcar, and we'll stop you if you're at a station. If no one's there, we don't, we don't stop there. So we're not spending extra time there. So I think it would have relatively marginal impacts on our overall times now, but I think if we look at expanding it, over a greater distance, whether that was further up Woodward or connecting to some of the corridors, I think looking at the number of stops in the distance would make more sense to calibrate that. So I say it's always.
I'll do a follow-up,
Yeah.
Robert, that how did the having stops closed impact your runtime? And is it something, I mean, I was kind of a fan of having fewer stops personally, just in terms of some of them are both cases, some of the stops are very close together. So yeah, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I'm guessing that you were a fan because the stops that you needed were open.
That's a good point.
Probably helped. And that's part of thinking about that too, is even though stops are close together, if they're serving something that's adjacent to those stops, could make a difference. Our system is automated, so down to the second, we know how long it takes to get to the station, we can tinker with the dwell times and stuff. I think that one possible possibility could be some sort of system where you're entertaining people actually having to ask for the trains to stop. But because it's a one-way loop, that it's easy for things to kind of get out. Try to keep things pretty even and spread
Yeah.
out. So I think, part of if we're gonna do like a downtown mobility study, looking at other stations that could be closed or added or spurs, would all be part of the comprehensive look at things, but right now each station kind of serves its own, and it can be adjusted so we're not spending too much time there.
All right, makes sense. Let's see, question right in the front here.
I'm curious, this question for Lisa, what makes transit police different than like regular police efforts?
Or maybe-
Are there like different training involved, like?
No. Especially now, so transit police is now state licensed police department. Before they were kind of they were a step below that, so they were on the same level as like a community college or hospital campus. Those are to track all the schools as a police department. Now they're basically just like any other community academy. You have to get your license, get the same kind of training for all of your equipment. We really, one of the things that we really focused on, we had any transit police that covers QLINE, people mover, and is to have more of assistive and passenger kind of approach to things, so making sure that the last resort is to be, hands-on or to be like police-like, would be the best way to put it, but really focus on helping people navigate the system, navigate their trip, as a first step. And I think that because the transit police is a dedicated unit that is all they do, it allows them to be, again, the training is basically the same, but in practice, just the type of work and the techniques they're dealing with every day, kind of lets them be a little bit more fine-tuned to really deal with supporting transit riders, also the drivers and operators and services.
Yeah, I'll just add that as, users of that service, I mean, we have the same officers who, know our route, know our operators, know the passengers, and so they're able to form this relationship with folks, and we worked with transit police and the city to lobby for that legislation to get changed, so we have the ability to self-tow. This was also a part of that. Another benefit is that now based on the type of agency that they are, they can write different tickets, which takes them, or they're having to go through 36 district court, which we don't want them, to be able to go through that additional burdens of the system. So we were able to make people out of that as well, and have them just regular citations, or something that's blocking or a streetcar or things like that. So it's been really good.
Great question.
Yeah, I feel like it's a great place to provide support. Stop the QLINE.
And we do a lot of wellness check type things. I mean, if we have people who are at the stations or on the street cars and not being off, or sometimes we have people fall asleep and are okay, and sort of what they do even from as officers, yeah.
This thing we talked about Mr. Springer. We're smart, best.
Thank you.
But, I was curious, I know you guys have racks on the, people mover, but I see a.
Have what?
Like PTE.
You have reps. Oh, reps.
Yeah.
Advertising. Okay.
Oh, my God.
You are a key advertising.
Wondering on QLINE, that you guys thought about having racks.
They've had raps too.
They had, I think
Yeah.
I like Van Gogh, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
We have, we're getting into QLINE because, Quicken Loans, back when they were called Quicken Loans, they bought the naming rights for the streetcar, and so they needed the QLINE. And so they have exclusive rights to, both name and then also wraps or right of first refusal. So we've been approaching them about some of the community kind of stuff where the DIA just paid for the cost of it, and we aren't getting any advertising revenue from that, which is fine, but it was a way to market this wonderful event that was in the city, and by the way, we still want to get there too, so. That's how it happened.
I was just saying maybe a few graphs that Detroit Department of Transportation needs bus drivers.
Ah.
I'm just.
We need others too.
One of the online questions, is the Detroit People Mover fare covered by the DART system used by PDOT Smart QLINE, or if not, are there plans to integrate it? Or I'll build on that. So, discuss fares and any potential to join QLINE in having a free service. So yes, talk to us about fares and the People Mover.
Okay, so 75 cents is our current fare. We do have tokens, special tokens that have a cool little logo on them. It's not really the most ideal, just being out of the system during the Taylor Swift concert. I may have purchased a bucket full of tokens as people were there, like, how am I gonna get there? Because I don't know if they're acting their fellow Swifties, like, oh, did you have a quarter left from your token? And so because the system is original, it's 35 years old, there's no option other than quarters, nickels, dimes, and tokens. And then we have the token machines that can be jammed with people's dollar bills and such. So there was some point in the past where the machine where card was programmed, I believe it was when Reflex was in service, where the Magstripe card was able to work on the fare gates, but that has not been reproduced since that point. Again, that was a very low tech, solution. So we'll have some analysis and decisions to make on what we want to do with our fare system, because the equipment itself needs to be replaced, not only physically, but also the technology to go with it. If our equipment would allow it, it would be a no-brainer for us to be integrated into the DART system, just as QLINE was before the pandemic when we were collecting fares. That was something that was, you could use your DART pass as a form of evidence that you were allowed to ride, or however you want to do that. So no, we're not connected right now, and
Do you have a sense of how much it would cost to replace that
a lot.
fare system?
I think we have 75 fare gates. So just
Okay,
thinking about the equipment, it's not, I mean, Smart Data has 200 or 300 vehicles that have them, but fare gate is more substantial than those units as well. So it would be substantial, and so that'll be part of the discussion, is do we try to retrofit the machines we have there with some sort of scanners, or we'll find another way altogether to get people in an office system.
or I think it would be awesome if we could convince either the state or the tourism bureau or somebody to just cover that cost and have the people mover be a service for mobility.
I can promise we wouldn't turn that down.
Yes. Right, Robert, what else would you like to bring up?
Thank you, Megan. So I'd like to give credit to Lisa for all the work she's done, improving QLINE. Had the pleasure to take my youth council earlier this year on the QLINE. I absolutely loved it. Especially to go to the Taylor Swift concert as well. You didn't hear that, but one of the questions I posed to Robert is, you talk about fare structure, and we've seen when it first opened, it was points, cash, tokens. Do you guys have plans to remodel those stations, make them more, make them more new to like what DDOT is doing? They're planning to revitalize their transit center, make it smaller. They have kiosks in place, more seating areas, charging areas, waiting areas, but also changing their fare structures when the main key pointers I'm looking at this situation. Lisa was, before the pandemic, looking at upgrading our if you want to be able to use all three services just with DART. Is that something that people are looking into? Because that's a main concern for me. Because I personally want to see the coins and cash tokens go away. I want to see, being expanded and being, being mover as a future, not the past.
Yeah, I mean, kind of similar. The equipment has to allow it. We would always want to have some option for people that need to use cash. And because we have our stations that are secure buildings, and that's a huge component of the QLINE, because they're city vending machines are just out there, right? I mean, you can grab a car and one, you can think of all sorts of creative ways to that. I don't want to give anyone any ideas, but so a little bit more control distribution, but it's still, I mean, machines, hearing the build jams, and then also having that's a barrier, right? So it's a good thing in some ways if we only have cash, but if we don't have cash, then now it's just another barrier to be able to use it. So yeah, if we're able to have the equipment quick, then as soon as we're able to integrate with DART, we would do it right away.
I think that's one more question, Megan, if you don't mind. So, Lisa also talked about expanding the QLINE. Now, a lot of city of Detroit residents want to see it go further. I mean, I've talked with tons of residents and they say it's a waste of money. And to an extent, I kind of agree with them. And I want to see it more expanded in the city. If we have a new state fair transit center that's going to be opening next year, would it be a possibility to expand it there, or maybe expand it with MDOT to really expand it into Ferndale? Because Ferndale's got a lot of people coming up in Detroit, even Royal Oak, even the zoo would really benefit from that as well.
Can you talk a little bit? Oh, sorry.
Having those things of lanes that are we'll see some arena. Those will benefit all the Uber.
Yeah, so the question that people couldn't hear was about the potential to expand the QLINE either north up to the State Fair Transit Center. I also bring up, I've heard discussions about Jefferson along the riverfront or Michigan Avenue up towards the train station. Do you have any ballpark as to what type of cost that would take to make that type of major investment?
Yeah, I mean, so we did do, we developed the project, initially back in, the mid-teens there. We did a thorough analysis of the process, you have to do, it's a multi-stage process where you have to look at all the alternatives and sort of choose the one you want to improve it and then examine the capacity. Environmental impacts, the negative impacts on communities, we do a bunch of impact assessments. So that was done, and that's a lot of work. It usually takes a couple of years process before you can move forward with projects. So that's one positive that we have on our corners that can be updated essentially, to reflect what's happened over the last 10 years. And we have a functioning system. But, it's there was every level of government, from the city to county to region to state to federal, that was involved in pulling together the resources to build new lines. So I know that there's conversation about infrastructure transit on the river. There's also, a lot of study going on Michigan Avenue with a ton of people and what is going on at the train stations. We're figuring out what are the uses, what are the needs, and what are the best types of transit to meet those needs. And from our service, I know we get a lot of that for me, like, my eyes are so slow. I think this streetcar with light rail. Light rail is a bigger route, right? You're coming in from graders is more to move fast, now. We're there, right? So, we so many things we got to say, it was sense to have that service stand up with the, would you want to be on the streetcar stay as long as it gets to 800? I think those are all questions we need to have a discussion about. And so what service meets the needs that exist in the best way, and then maybe do that with the different levels of are going to be responsible for coming with money to do it.
Besides Detroit Police, you are the only one that actually does the speed limit on Woodward. But thank you. Thank you, Megan.
If I can also, one of the online questions, shifting gears a little bit, which again is probably something you could, Francis, talk a lot about, but what can we do to prevent buildings from being demolished for parking? The person says downtown already has no parking requirements. Did you know, what can you say about what the parking requirements downtown are?
Oh, yeah, that is true. Actually, in central business district, there are ostensibly are parking. So the parking requirement implementation would be for the rest of the district.
Okay.
So the zoning, the very small part of downtown, the very small part of the district downtown, basically doesn't. Yeah,
But yeah, just more broadly, how do you save cool old buildings from being destroyed?
I was just joking to Lisa. I mean, I've been trying to figure that out for 25 years.
I know.
There are different tools or different things. You can get historic designation, which forces a process in terms of evaluating whether a building gets demolished or not. I think a lot of it is, the court of public opinion and, the political will to do something sometimes is just insurmountable. And especially if there's, a promise of new development or an eyesore, especially this current administration has latched onto this idea of polyhomation. And while I think that is a very reasonable, understand why that is a priority. The way that it's being treated out is, I don't always agree with, and I think resources could be used differently.
Absolutely. I think, let me get a question here.
Oh,
Yes.
or wait.
Next to Mitch. Next to Mitch. I know you had your hand up a while. So.
Now, people mover is, as we all know, I didn't give us my Vancouver. And as I understand it, and I think I'll hear a couple of things, in two-way operations, It's sort of a hard line, just like in place, double tracking. But given the fact that it's highly computerized, would it, this is theoretically possible? Forget it, money, to start two-way operations by putting in passive signings on portions of the network and then taking advantage of highly computerized operations to run the service. Now, airways might be something, but I'd rather have a train that goes with both directions every 7 minutes than a very nice train, which I took this afternoon, but a lot of minutes.
Yeah, I would say as a planner, I love questions that,
Don't require
don't worry
money.
about the money, yeah. So the simple answer is yes, the computer can drive, can navigate tracks. You could double track certain stations, maybe. I think there's gonna be a lot of work done in the next couple of years, so between now and 2027, I think there's a lot of changes in place that provide an opportunity for something like that. But it would have to be something that you're able to do all the way around the track. Obviously, if you can only pass one spot, it's not going to be effective. But yeah, that may be something that comes up relatively often as something to talk about and think about for the future.
All right. Back here? Yeah.
Both with the QLINE and expanding systems. Yes.
So if anyone didn't hear, yeah, the question is, are there any funding sources available for expansion of the Q line or the people mover?
Other than Megan's friend that can pay for free fares, I think,
I think the question is so much higher than funding sources. There are federal funding sources, right? There are like new starts, small starts with your federal programs that are used to do just that, to build transit. And cities around the country do it all the time. I think where we need to go before that is to be in agreement about what we need and what we need, right? And I think that there isn't necessarily a unified vision around that. So as an operator who's like operating the space and trying to do the best that we can do with the service we run, I don't know what is this bigger picture that we're trying to plug into, right? And how can we help grow that? How can we be a part of that if there isn't a vision we have? So I think that is something that we need as a vision. We need a clear picture and where we're all moving and the direction we're moving towards. What, and from the city level, the state level, and the provider level, the goal that we can all play. But funding is there. Doesn't mean it's easy, but the funding is there. But we need to know what we want to do first. And that's what goes beyond just not pass the buck, but it goes beyond just the two.
yeah.
So this is for Robert. So the technology on the people who are pretty outdated. I mean, really the only option is cash, or you put cash and you get tokens. Are you guys working on maybe an option like a app, or maybe integrating with the hard app, or even getting new machines?
You may have stepped out, but he did already answer a lot of that.
Just have the right equipment to do it. Yeah.
So, yeah,
another thing is, as I know, I do a lot of business in Miami, and there are people who are Metro who are it's free. Have you guys looked at maybe getting grants or something to make it free? Because I have a feeling it would. I mean, ridership would blow up free, and since it's really more of a circulator and most circulators in major cities, have you guys looked at going after grants or for that?
We haven't looked at it in depth since the pandemic happened, but that's something that we're kind of trying to feel our way around as far as what ridership and the generators and fares and mobility in general look like. So I'd say that nothing's off the table, and as we learn more about that and also see what our leaders do with that will become more focused in the future.
Definitely something because it's heavily utilized. they're already standing in something.
So a question from Ethan online. How can we get current drivers to get over their fear of perceived poverty shaming for choosing to take transit instead of paying for parking? I don't know if, certainly Francis, if you want to start, I don't know if anybody has ideas as to how do we shift this idea. I thought when you brought up Gil Peñalosa, you were going to maybe use the quote of a developed city or is not one, a well-developed city is not one where everybody, where the poor people can drive, but where the rich people choose to use transit. Yeah, but
I think one way, the work.
well, no, just to.
Yeah, the work that was done at Bedrock actually was really interesting pre-pandemic, where they did a lot of basically incentivizing riders, carpooling and bus ridership, mobility sort of education. And I don't know if that was ever really widely publicized. Unfortunately, the person who spearheaded that, there was changes and COVID, blah, blah, blah. But I understood it to be something that was popular to a degree greater than they anticipated, and also something that they had more ideas about utilizing. And I know that it's happened to some degree with some of the other corporations downtown, but I think a huge upside could be the businesses that are still downtown that, you know, could maybe see the writing on the wall in terms of, you know, incentivizing people to come to work or thinking about how people are coming to work and take a cue from what happened there. And I feel like there's all sorts of other, you know, I don't know what Wayne State's current policy or policies are, but there's a huge question mark over Wayne State now coming out of COVID and how they incentivize people taking, you know, different modes of transit.
Yeah, if folks aren't familiar, there have been, that's a great point. I think for the one time, that's much better signage. Clear and obvious for anybody who's coming out, like big, bold, obvious, like signage, but that, yeah, Wayne State offers free transit passes to all of their employees and students. So things like that for are very incentivized. But then you're right, Quicken had gone beyond that, and they're actually paying people, employees to not use their parking places. And they did some good testing of it. Yeah, I wish I was concerned with the board, but they first it was like, you know, a monthly amount. But then they figure out people still want to have that option parking occasionally. So it was literally each day, and you chose not to use your parking pass, whether you walked, carpool, bikes, transit, whatever, you got an extra, whatever, $6 or $12 it was.
Yeah.
And they did gamification things, so there are definitely a lot of tools, other states that are, other big states have worked on them.
I think another big, so a corollary to that, which, you know, we can only hope for or vote for, is leaders who actually believe in this thing.
Yes.
And who do this as part of their daily existence. Peñalosa is one example. You know, it's like, when's the last time Mike Duggan's taken the bus anywhere? You know, I don't know. I feel like that we need to see that as part of the sort of breaking of the chain that taking the deed on is only for poor people, you know, and that it's the only option when, you know, when everything else is when you don't have any other option. We need leaders to do this and do it as part of their daily existence. And you know,
It's not hard.
it's as much a hurdle for them, I think, psychologically, as the driver that chat. And, maybe it's reaching out to them, maybe it's the new president of Wayne State University, but it's a constant need that we have in this region to have leaders that actually understand what it is that, is servicing their constituents.
Joel and I were just talking about, that there was a Washington State Disability Group did a Week Without Wheels challenge to, especially elected officials, but all sorts of people. Can you get around for an entire week without driving your own personal car? But even, I need to pose a challenge to the next volunteer team meeting. Let's talk about it. What sort of ride the bus challenge can we offer to local elected officials? We've done some ride-alongs with various elected officials, but that is a great idea. Starting by making sure they actually get on transit ever.
Yes.
It's accompanied by advocates and riders. Maybe extending beyond that. Maybe don't have any campaign around get our elected officials to get on transit and write about their experience.
Yeah, and I think those are just the people that we should hold accountable. But
That's a starting.
It's a starting point, but I've had fantasies for years about just not just taking transit, but living in cities, why don't all the tigers take the bus?
Yeah.
Or you can think about different constituencies to tap into. I posted something about Taylor Swift. I don't remember on Facebook or Twitter or something. I actually tweeted at Taylor Swift. I didn't get a response.
No.
But this was my point, was if Taylor Swift, and I don't even pick on Taylor Swift, but the point was if Taylor Swift said anything about taking the bus to her show, it would immediately change the conversation about transit in southeastern Michigan. Right?
And I mean, there were some interesting articles about just how many transit boosts.
Yeah.
Save all over the country.
And it's that kind of thing that I think, we need to be thinking about in terms of changing that dialogue.
Well, we need to wrap. Let's see, maybe I'll give Mitch the last question and then we'll get some final comments from each of our panelists before we close for the evening.
Yeah, so Francis, you mentioned zoning, which I've been really excited about. It's not the LA back in early 2019.
Yeah.
And then all through the pandemic, they kept updating our website saying it's coming in fall, it's coming in winter, it's coming in spring. Now it says spring 2023. It is the end of spring 2023. Do you think we will see a zoning update before I die?
Can you explain to anybody who's not as familiar what he's referencing?
So there's a process that the city planning commission goes through every 10 years or so. That's part of it. It's they have to do it, they're required to do it. And in this iteration, it's called Zone Detroit, which has been a public process for 4 or 5 years now. And there have been promises to push it through before we knew about COVID, and then through COVID, and now, So I don't know what the answer to your question is. Like many places, they are understaffed and dealing with a lot of different priorities. And I would suggest that, if you want to see action, it's another thing to request from city council is what's up with Zone Detroit, because it has a bunch of provisions that I think are pretty interesting, and one of them is this removal of the parking. So I wish I could say, and in that I'm even here today. Now, tomorrow I'm going to email the staffer there to ask about it tomorrow to see if I find out anything.
Well, obviously, this is a huge topic we can talk a lot more about, but we do want to wrap shortly. So I'll ask each of you to give a final minute or two of comments, either what did we not talk about, what is coming next that people should be excited about, or Anything else you want to close with?
Well, I said I was reading these books, right? So this one I just picked up from Book
Sorry?
Suey and Hamtramck. Yeah. And Joel spotted me on my bike in Hamtramck as I was going there. I got it last week. I'm only about like, whatever this is, like a quarter into it. So I went ahead and read the conclusion. And there's one paragraph, this is a short paragraph at the end, but it kind of struck me about what parking really means and how we should be thinking about it. So I'll just read this as well. Parking is access, but it is access of the most superficial sort, one that often papers over deeper inequities we're unwilling to address. Ample parking at the ball fields feels like a requirement because the roads are too dangerous for parents to let kids ride their bikes. Free parking near campus looks good for students who can't imagine living close enough to walk. Easy parking in wealthy neighborhoods is a lifeline for workers who will never be allowed to live nearby. And acres of parking downtown feels like a right to commuters and shoppers when the bus comes only once an hour. In each case, parking stands for a primitive kind of access that both overshadows and impedes a more profound and widely held right to the city. I thought that was Thank you.
Excellent point.
Yeah, I'm excited. No, I mean, I think the point that Francis raises, and I think like the space that we all operate in is like our cities have been shaped by decisions that prefer one group of users over others, right? And I think that we're all in our own ways trying to do our parts to reclaim space for people and not just for cars, and thinking about how transit plays a role in that, how housing plays a role in that, how access to opportunities, so jobs and education plays a role in that, and making our streets safer. You know, I came at this work sort of in a roundabout way. I founded MOGO, the bike share system, not because I thought, you know, everybody's going to ditch their car and hop on a bike, but if we don't have more options for people to get around, people aren't going to do anything but what they know. They're just going to get in their car and they're going to go. And so I think, from my perspective, providing more options that work better for more people. And then we really have to, I think, like understand really understand the fallout from the pandemic and how that's changed how people are spending time in our public spaces, because it has changed. And I was just thinking about when you were answering a question earlier, there's this concept of a TMA, it's a transit management association, but it's an organization that essentially works with employers, with governments, et cetera, to help like bridge the gap from people who are like maybe transit curious, but they're like, but I don't know, how do I use it, where do I go? And it helps really kind of break down the barriers for people. And so I think that kind of work is really important. And I don't know what that looks like in a space where employers aren't requiring employees to come to work every day, but I do think that there are things that could be learned from that work and applied to our reality today. Our ever-changing reality as we're evolving out of the 3 years of COVID, but to figure out how we can get more people out of cars, using transit and using our public space for better and higher.
You got a lot in there, yeah. So riffing on, so riffing on what Lisa and Francis were saying, I think a lot of the challenge, and I have a little bit of perspective on this, just from I wouldn't have thought like, oh, I'm going to end up that smart and then I'll go to the people mover, because it's really from a outside perspective looking in, it's very different, right? It's kind of like oh yeah, it just goes around in a circle, and there's plenty of things if you have that kind of attitude about it. But I think a lot of that is just based on not having the information, right? The information is power. And there was actually a comment in the chat when we were talking about how to get people to break the habits of using cars, and it said that it should be a requirement if driver's education is a rite of passage as a teenager, that you should actually have to take a how to ride the bus
Yeah.
exercise as part of that. And I know at Smart, that was something that we put quite a bit of effort into, was starting with seniors and individuals with disabilities, but also high school groups, camps, community centers. Is a lot of times it's just that understanding, and I think that's where the People Mover has the most potential, right? The system's there. Like Lisa, you've done a great job of like trying to make your system work better. Like ours is up above, right? There's nobody can block the tracks. The computer drives. We can have no operators, but only our control center, and the train would still run. But so the biggest barrier really is helping people understand how see themselves making that connection. And I think that the more, and it's difficult because you can see it, but you can't touch it, right? You hear it, you can see it up there, you see these doors and stuff, but making people understand how that system works, how it interfaces with the QLINE, right? That's like another joke, is like, oh, there's these two rail systems. Yeah, but if you add them together, it serves a huge amount of destinations and residential areas and cultural destinations that really could benefit with just a little bit more of the coordination that I'm happy to be working with Lisa on. And also from a parking perspective, I was kind of intrigued. I was like, oh, parking reform, that's my life before Smart. We did parking studies, so this all makes sense to me. Like, $1 per hour parking on the street in the high priority space, or like $40 to park on the deck. Totally backwards, right?
Yeah.
But there's just a lot of potential, I think, and getting people to understand. I think that is a role for the advocacy community too, is helping people understand that maybe not the focus. I think the focus can be less about what type of people or situations can use it. It's just about that it's there and it's an option and it's a way to connect. I think that's kind of the challenge, is helping people understand what's out there.
Absolutely, excellent. Well, we are, and definitely thrilled to have had such great speakers, and I will say our systems are in amazing hands with Robert and Lisa. Not only making sure that they're getting the basics right, thinking beyond about how to make it a truly attractive system and make it as accessible as possible. So, join me here. I do think, actually Lisa gave a great preview. Our next Transit Tuesday talk, July 18th, we're going to be up at the main library talking about active mobility. We've got the not the QLINE, we've got the MOGO oh my gosh, Todd Scott from Detroit Greenways. We're talking hopefully someone from the city's Streets for People. So we can talk about active mobility and safe streets, because obviously this is all part of a network. True's mission, we believe everyone should be able to get where they need to go. Sometimes a bus is a great way to go, and we spend a lot of our time focused on the buses because that has been such an underinvested, underrespected area. So that's where True puts a lot of our time and resources. But really the idea is that we should have choices. Coming from our office in Tech Town down here, in some ways we have a ton of options. People talk about, oh, Detroit doesn't have transit. Well, actually, while I did have to run other errands and did in fact drive this time, the fact that there is the QLINE, that there are at least 3 buses within a block of our office at Tech Town Detroit. There's a MOGO station. There's several dedicated bike lanes. There's scooters. There's a ton of options. What I really want to see is how do we make the rest of the region have that breadth of options so that people truly can feel like, I need to go from A to B. What's the best way to get there? That's really where we want to go. And we've had some great conversations today about the fault. I like the way you were framing it, Francis, that like parking sometimes is often seen as the false choice. It's what you need when the other systems fail. So how do we make sure we get all of those other systems right? So, and getting those systems right includes making sure we have enough funding at the local, at the state, the federal level. So if you haven't yet, make sure you call and send postcards and send emails to your state legislators and tell them to boost funding for transit. because they're deciding on a $6 billion transportation budget that only has a sliver increase for transit so far. And get involved, because there's so many more opportunities to help shape perception, information, and opportunities for transit and mobility. So thank you again to our speakers. Thank you all for coming out. And we don't have to head out immediately. We can keep the conversation going. So thanks so much.
Good conversation.